Thank you once again, everyone, for coming and joining us in this time of just worship and committing ourselves to the Lord. Thank you, Joan, for leading us in a time of worship. I said earlier, today we are exploring the topic of what it means to be to be on mission with God as peacemakers. And the particular topic that we're exploring is religious nationalism and conversion. We are glad that we have our speakers here with us. In a short while, I will introduce more of them to you. But let me just briefly go through the program for this morning, and that is this. Next slide. After this welcome and introduction, we will have a dialogue with our speakers, and we are glad to have Samuel Ratnam, who is our moderator today, to moderate the dialogue. But thereafter, we will break out into our breakout rooms, our learning communities, and we want to discuss and learn together. And so I will be sharing with us the question that we want to reflect on just before the dialogue, so that we can, even as we think about the question, as we listen to the dialogue, we can think about the question as well. And then we'll break out into our discussion groups, and there is a online PowerPoint that we hope you can fill in, so that over the months we can grow to learn what it means together to be peacemakers, even on mission with God. And then thereafter, we'll come back for the last 5 minutes for some concluding remarks and concluding words. All right. And so when we break out later into our learning community, we meet once a month. Next slide. And this is our desire to grow together. We'll break out into our various countries of interest from all over Southeast Asia. And we will learn together over this time of breakfast fellowship. So today, in our discussion, okay, so we'll put up the question later. But in the meantime, let me now introduce our speakers for today. We've got Dr. Kumza Mang. Dr. Mang is the Associate Professor of World Christianity at Myanmar Institute of Theology. He earned his MA at Princeton, and then thereafter his PhD from Luther Seminary. He's a prolific writer and has contributed many articles in all the various journals that you see here. And he's currently a research scholar at Luther Seminary, and we are glad to be able to have him share with us his insights today, this morning in our call. For him, it is evening because he's based in the US right now. So thank you, Dr. Mang, for joining us this evening. We also have Dr. Si Tutun. Dr. Si Tu is an Associate Professor of Theology in Karen Baptist Theological Seminary in Yangon, and receiving his PhD from St. Thomas University. His research interests are in public theology and theology of peace and reconciliation, something that is very close to our to SCGM in our understanding of what it means for us to be on mission with God as peacemakers. So we are really thankful that Dr. Situ has also joined us this morning in our call. And our moderator, many of you know him very well. He's none other than Samuel Ratnam. He has been a leader, disciple of the church for many years. His areas of ministry are in preaching and teaching all over Southeast Asia and South Asia. He worships at St. Hilda's church, and he is retired now, but he had a business in the agricultural seed business. And so we are grateful and thankful that Samuel is our moderator for today's conversation as well. Okay, so without further ado, I don't know, do we have the question that we want all of us to reflect on? If not, we can go straight into the dialogue first, and then I'll share the question before we break out into the discussion groups in a short while.
You can share the question.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joan. And so without further ado, let me hand over this time to Samuel, who will be moderating the dialogue for today. Thanks, Samuel.
Thank you, Pastor Ben. I want to welcome all of you, participants. It's wonderful to see you all on the screen here. Maybe one day we'll meet each other. Also, a warm welcome to Dr. Mang and Dr. Sithu. The topic that is we are under consideration is this religious nationalism and conversion. So that all of us will be on the same page in our understanding of what is being addressed. I thought we would begin by, not with definitions, but by asking this question. What do you mean by nationalism? What are the key traits that characterize nationalism? Just to name a few, a common or shared history, geography, and so on and so forth. At this stage, we are not making specific reference to the religious nationalism, for which we will come to it. But to understand nationalism in its broad sense, and this is what we're going to address first so that we all be on the same page. Dr. Situ, would you like to start off with your views on it?
Thank you, Samuel. Good morning. Please call me Sidhu. Nationalism, for me, different people, if you look at the literatures, you will quickly realize that nationalism means different things to different people. So for me, nationalism, basically, it's a psychological feeling, or it's an ideology. It has come to existence as an ideology not too long ago, only in a relatively recent time. For example, the term nationalism started to appear in English language in the 18th century, and people started to use it commonly only in the 19th century. So nationalism, people understand humanity to be composed of different nationalities. And from a nationalism point of view, each nationality can and should establish a nation state for itself. The idea of the nation state itself is, if you look at the world history, it is also pretty recent. It came into human history as an idea, also as a reality, only in late 18th century and early 19th century. Nationalism tells us who belongs to or does not belong to our group. So it is about who is in, who is out, who is with us, or who is kind of against us. Nationalism comprises of several different elements, such as common race or ethnicity, language, history, religion, traditions, geography, and wars. Nationalism is also an attempt from national groups to be free from the domination of other nation states or nationalities who they perceive as to be more powerful. So nationalism, it is also sometimes associated with the struggles against colonialism. Okay? So some people believe that the nationalism we have at this moment around the world is mostly the result of white European colonialism. So this is my understanding of what nationalism is. Thank you.
Dr. Mang, would you like to add on to that?
First and foremost, Samuel and all of you, I'm very honored to be part of the discussion today. And I'm very honored that you kindly invited me. And of course, again, thank you for your commitment and sacrifice. And of course, passion for Christ and the church and mission our country. And Dr. Situ actually precisely and very strongly discussed the core idea of nationalism. So I will not have much to add to that. But if I add just one single component, as you said earlier, nationalism is not something very old, actually. In the past, I would say in early, much early centuries, there were empires. So there was no something that I think we call today nationalism, because there were many peoples and ethnicities in what we call modern state in one empire in many centuries ago. So the idea, nationalism actually was a modern how should I put it, modern thing, because maybe 5 or 6 or 7 centuries ago, there were big emperors, German emperors, Russian emperors, and then, of course, in the early times, the Roman Empire. So in that empire, there were many nations. So the idea of modern nationalism actually started, as he said earlier, in the late 18th or early 19th century. So I don't think I need to add more than that, Samuel. Thank you. The idea is that in many centuries, there was no things that we call modern nationalism. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for highlighting that and the background to it. That it was a fairly, well, not that old, but neither was it something that is entirely new, nationalism. Now, can we go on to this whole idea of religious nationalism, and what's the role of religious nationalism in nation building? Dr. Mang, would you like to comment on that?
Thank you, Samuel. I will talk about the history of the Buddhist nationalism or nationalism in our country, because I don't think I can include, many parts of religious nationalisms in other parts of the world. So in our country, back in the 11th century, the king of the Burman people, Anuruddha, actually founded the first ever Burman kingdom in the history of a country, especially in the center part of the country, called the Pakhan. And then, of course, at that time, the people actually practiced Theravada, Mahayana Buddhism, and some other elements of native religion. At that time, actually, the Buddhist monk from the south, especially the Mon people, came, and then from that men, they actually adopted what becomes the Burmese Theravada Buddhism back in the 11th century. And since then, all kings of the Burman people actually practice Buddhism as their national religion. And the idea was that if you are truly Burman, you have to be Buddhist. So that idea started in the 11th century. For instance, back in the early 17th century, some Christians came from Europe, especially from Portugal, and they lived in Burma for so many years. And of course, one of the greatest among them was had become actually the governor of southern, what we call the southern Burma today, especially the Pope in recent day Danling, so next to Yangon. And at that time, the princess of one of the princes of Burma became a Catholic, and he was killed. The king told him that you are a Burman Buddhist. You cannot become a Christian. If you leave your religion and becomes a Christian, we will kill you. But if you come back to Buddhism, then you will be spared. We will not kill you. But that prince actually refused to return to Buddhism. And back in 1613, he was executed or he was killed only because he became a Christian. So he was the first Burmese Christian killed for his religion. His name was Nassing, the most famous poet in the history of our country. So he was the first Christian killed for his religion. And of course, since then, all the kings of our country hold and serve as the protector and the promoter of Buddhism. So if you are truly Burman, and you have to be Buddhist. If you become Christian, or if you become Christian or Muslim or whatever, if you practice whatever religion other than Buddhism, then you will consider the one who abandoned your nationality, your ethnicity, and you no longer belong there. So in that way, Buddhism has been part and parcel of Burman ethnic identity. So that is the beginning of the history of religious nationalism, especially Buddhist nationalism in our country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Long. It's good that you highlighted this whole thing about national identity. To be a Burmese is to be a Buddhist. I think it's the same thing in Cambodia. To be a Cambodian is to be a Buddhist. In India, to be an Indian is to be a Hindu. I think that's a very vital aspect of it. That I also noticed that in religious nationalism, I look at some of the writings. Religious nationalism is sometimes weaponized for political ends. At the same time, you'll find that nations are also, where religion is being used as a statecraft for nation building. So you have these two situations also. And for statecraft, nation building, then you have the more militant, where it is weaponized. Can I go on to another area, and that is this. In Myanmar, did religious nationalism begin in pre-colonial days, colonial or post-colonial period? Dr. Mang, would you like to comment on that? I think you wrote something on that area.
Thank you, Samuel. Okay, thank you for the question. As I said earlier, in the 11th century, King Anorotar started, or I would say, the legacy of portraying himself as the protector of Buddhism. And of course, a Buddhist monk alone can give the political legitimacy to the king. So if you became the king of the country, then you have to have the legitimacy. And you can get that only from the monks. So there is a reciprocal interplay between the king and the monks. So as I said earlier, that was the very beginning of the religious nationalism of our country. And throughout history, as you say, I said earlier, back in the 16th century, the European Christian came. The first were Armenians, and the second, of course, who came from Europe were Portuguese, and later on Italians and French. So they never evangelized the Burman Buddhists, not because they did not want to evangelize them, but because the king told them not to spread the religion. So even though it's a Christian, presence started back in the 16th century. There was no serious mission attempt or effort among the Buddhist Burman. The reason was, as I said earlier, that not because they did not want to evangelize the people, but because they were told not to evangelize the people, because they were Buddhists and they must remain as Buddhists. And of course, the Jesuit and the Protestant missionary came in the early 19th century, I would say. And then, of course, Jesuit Adoniram Jesuit started attempts to evangelize the Burman Buddhists, but not much with not much success. And eventually, he turned his attention to the Korean ethnic group, to which Sasitu, by the way, belonged, of course. And he succeeded among the Korean so much, so that Christianity became part of. No, I will not say part of Korean identity, but it became a very important part of the Korean society since the 19th century. And again, many Koreans supported the British, and the British, of course, support and then defended the interests of the Korean. And of course, the Burmese were very angry because the colonialists support the Korean. And then, of course, back in 62, there was an uprising from the Buddhist monks and the Buddhist population. And the current soldiers in the Qing soldiers were used by the British to crush that Burman-led uprising. That escalated the tension between Christians and Buddhists on the one hand, and the Burman and the minorities like the Karen, the Qing, and the Kachin, of course. And independent, of course, eventually was there back in 1948. And at that time, actually, many of the Kachin and the Qing became Christian, and certain part of the Korean also became Christian. So Buddhism became already has been part of the Burman identity, and Christianity becomes part of the Qing and Kachin and part of the Korean identity. So that is the development of religious nationalism. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Very briefly, Dr. Situ, you have anything to add on to that?
Thank you, Sam. My friend Dr. Mang explained what nationalism from a specific experience or from a specific context. I just want to quickly add, I want to add from a more general point of view. So religious nationalism, I hope that I'm complementing the point that he made. Religious nationalism, it is the combination of two things, very simple, right? Religion and nationalism. Okay. So what religion and nationalism, the religion gives a lot of things to people. Nationalism also gives a lot of things to people. One thing in common they give to people is identity. Religion gives identity to people. Nationalism also gives identity to people. So in religious nationalism, people merge the identity that religion gives them and then the identity nationalism gives them. They merge them together. That merging becomes religious nationalism. So for example, Christian nationalists in the United States, they regard the US as the American nation as Christian nation. So Christianity should be given priority. The government should give priority to Christianity. It is the same thing here in Burma or Myanmar. There are a lot of Buddhists here. They think that Buddhism should be given priority in the society and also by the government. So religious nationalism, in my opinion, it is an instrument. It is an instrument that acts as a glue. So religion gives you a glue, nationalism gives you a glue. Now you have two glues, two tubes of glues, if you will. So very powerful to keep everything together, to keep everyone stick together, to glue everyone up together so that you won't break up. So religious nationalism, whether religious nationalists are aware of it or whether they admit it, it is an instrument. Mostly it is an instrument in politics. So this is something that I want to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much for enlightening all those things. I also note that the impact of religious nationalism in Myanmar has been uneven. So, like the Karens, the Kachins and Chins are more receptive, whereas the Burma people have found it more difficult to accept the Christian faith. I think this is the common observation, but I think this is just a comment. But I want to go to another question that we need to consider, and it's where we are building up to. We have been talking of differences. Now we want to come to this aspect of building bridges. How can the followers of Christ build bridges rather than walls with the Buddhists? What attitudes and actions should we adopt? Let's begin with attitudes and then proceed to action. Dr. Situ, some time ago when we were discussing about this, and you mentioned about how in your journey of relationships between a Christian and a Buddhist, you started off by adopting a hard-line approach, but then subsequently it began to change. Can you briefly share this journey with us? It's your story.
Yeah, thank you again, Sam. Most of my life, I have, when I was growing up, I should say, I was growing up under a very repressive military regime. And then, as you all know, now we still have that repressive military regime. So when I was growing up, even though I was growing up in a small town just outside the biggest city here in Myanmar, I was pretty much aware of what was going on both in the cities and also in the rural area, because I belong to an ethnic minority. I was aware what was happening to the ethnic group that I belong to. So I think I would say I became bitter. I became very angry, you know, and then I believe that this military government had to go. And I believe that we have to make them go. So, and the only way that we can make them go is that to fight them with weapons. I'm not talking about fighting non-violent. I came to believe that, and then I started to study theology at the Korean Baptist Theological Seminary here as an undergraduate student, and I was pretty much interested in the Latin American liberation theology, right? Some Latin American liberation theologians, some Catholic priests, they took up arms. They fought along with the guerrillas. So it really, fascinated me. Those priests, those Latin American theologians, and I was looking for justification for that kind of struggle. And at one point I found it. I don't know, looking back now, I don't know whether I understood Thomas Aquinas correctly or not. But at the time I understood Thomas Aquinas, his idea of tyrannicide. The tyrannicide is the subjects in a country, they have the right to kill the king or the monarch or the ruler if the monarch, the ruler, becomes very oppressive. So Thomas Aquinas used the term tyrannicide. You can kill. You have the right to kill the tyrant. So I thought that it was the justification for me to opt for that option when it comes to, ending the military repression, military regime in my country. But as I continued my theological education, it was a gradual process. I came to realize that actually violence does not end violence. So if I want to end violence, it has to start with me. I have to end my violence first. So I started to do research on peace, reconciliation, forgiveness. And at first I was pretty, doubtful about that. But later on, I realized that by using nonviolence, or, by not using weapons, by not using violence, by going down the road of peace and reconciliation, that is the only road, that is the only feasible option. I mean, for my country, and I believe anywhere, that is the only road. And that is, I'm not saying that I'm better than other Christians who believe that they have the right to take up arms and to revolt against, oppressive dictators. I'm not saying that I'm better than that, or I have a better understanding of the Bible than they do. But this is my theology, this is my belief that peace and reconciliation is God's will, because we are the children of God are who make peace. So this is a very brief version of my journey, how I come to the peace and reconciliation and forgiveness track. Thank you.
Dr. Mang, you also mentioned in a preliminary session of your experience with a Buddhist monk. I think it was in Bangkok or somewhere else, where you noticed that he had a Bible within. Can you relate your experience of what happened?
Yes, in June 2022, I live in Bangkok for 70 days and 70 nights. And I live at a hotel, a Christian hotel in central Bangkok. At the time, actually, 2 or 3 days after I arrived there, I had become, familiar with a Burmese man, especially Buddhist. And then we came to know each other. And one day he invited me to his room, and I went to his room. And he told me he was a Burmese Buddhist. And when I entered his hotel room, I saw the Bible on the table. It was very interesting for me. So I asked him, "You say you're a Buddhist, and you say you're a Burmese, and you have the Bible. Why? Someone put here, or the hotel put here, or you brought here?" And he told me, "I brought here, I studied the Bible, because I'm now interested in Christianity." Out of my curiosity, I asked him, why? What forced you, or what compelled you to be interested in Christianity? He told me that he was the man leading public protests against the military regime back in 2021. And people, of course, give up public protests after the military regime killed hundreds of protesters. And he, along with many of his friends, left the country, crossing the land border from southern Shan State. And he told me that all people, individuals and groups who happened to be part of his journey along the way, all of them were Christian. And of course, they helped him. And groups of people who helped him, and individuals who helped him, all along the way to Bangkok were Christian. And he applied for the refugee status. And the UNHCR gave him the refugee status, and eventually he was given the chance to resettle in Canada. And when I was there, he was waiting for the final approval from the Canadian government. And before I left Bangkok for the United States, he left Bangkok. And now he joined the church in Canada. And he told me that, as I said earlier, what changed his heart was not our doctrine, but very pure love shown by Christians and Christian organizations along the way. And of course, we went to the Christ Kingdom Church in Bangkok when I was there. And eventually he asked his father to allow him to be a Christian. And his father asked him, is Buddhism very different from Christianity, or is Christianity very different from Buddhism? After a certain discussion, of course, his father allowed him to be baptized. And now he becomes a practicing Burman Christian living in Canada. So he told me that just a pure love changed him. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Sito, you really brought up a very important point that you discovered in your journey, and that was violence does not end violence. I think that's a very critical thought. And thank you, Dr. Mang, for emphasizing the love by Christian. I mean, God is love, and that was what that stood up. Can we now move on to another area? Instead of pointing out differences in Buddhism and Christianity, are there common grounds in Buddhism and the Christian faith, where there can be a start of a dialogue. Yeah, there are differences, but let's see what, as we try to bridge uh, uh, Buddhism and Christianity without compromising certain basic fundamentals of the Christian faith. Are there points in which Christians can start off in their dialogue with Buddhists that will make connecting points? Dr. Mang, would you like to comment on that?
Thank you. Yes, of course, sometimes we overemphasize our differences, and sometimes we forget that there are many commonalities between Christianity and Buddhism, especially Burmese Christianity and Burmese Buddhism. First and foremost, in Buddhist culture, education is highly valued. And in our Christian tradition, education is also grounded truth of our history. From Africa and Latin America to Asia, and even in our country, our missionaries emphasize the importance of education. And in Buddhist Burman culture, education is also highly valued. So I think in the area of education, we can work together for, of course, the cause of our country, and that can also have the church and of course the Christianity and our country as a whole. And of course, actually, we share the same humanity as we always discuss, regardless of our different religious background. Actually, we are human first before we belong to certain religious groups or ethnicity. So on that basis, I think we can share many things. We share the same humanity, regardless of our color, of our skin color, or of course our ethnicity or geography, nationality, or whatsoever. We share the same humanity. And on top of that, actually, this day, as Dr. Sidhu said earlier, our country suffer very, it's very sad to see our people suffering like this. This is historically unprecedented. And this suffering does not know religion, actually. Christians and Buddhists and Muslims and even people who have no religion, they suffer together. So they deserve our care, our love, and of course our service, whatever we can do. Actually, so they suffer together, regardless of their religion or their ethnicity. So in their suffering, they share the same thing. And I will say that this is the last thing I want to say, actually. In Buddhist culture, they have tradition of caring or looking after people who are less fortunate. In our Christian tradition, our Lord Jesus Christ also teaches us, look after the smallest one among you. When I'm thirsty, you give me water to drink. When I'm hungry, you give me food to eat. When I'm in prison, you come and you visit me. When I'm naked, you give me clothes. So I think in this difficult time, actually, we can work together with our Buddhist neighbor in looking after people, the most vulnerable, the smallest, and the poor. So in that way, we can show our love. As I said earlier, not always, but so often, just pure love can change the heart of people. So this time around especially, if we can look after the smallest one, the most vulnerable, then this is actually the core mission of our tradition. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sidhu, briefly, when I add on to that, what are the common areas of that we can work on?
Yeah, thank you, Sam, and thank you, Dr. Mang. Yes, since we are humanity first, if we can all agree on that, let's start with, Dr. Mang already said that very clearly. Let's start with what humanity needs or what human beings need, right? So we can work together for our community, for the society, without talking about, how we understand the beginning of the universe, or how we understand, the nature of human being, how we understand what comes after death. We can work together without talking about those things. And then, but our differences in faith won't go away. We always need to keep in mind about that. We shouldn't be, we shouldn't be too optimistic, or we shouldn't be too naive. Sometimes people, I think, not all people think that if we work together with Buddhists or Muslims or Hindus, one day we will come to a complete understanding of each other. That is not true. That has never happened, and in my opinion, I don't think that will ever happen. We will still have our differences, but it doesn't mean that we cannot work together. We can work together. Let's just find points, not relating to faith, not relating to doctrines, not relating to metaphysics or whatever it is, but things that are related to humanity. And then let's see what we can do together. Let's work together. As we work together, we will talk, we will discuss, we will debate. And I hope that when we do that, we will come understand each other more. Thank you.
Thank you. I think what both of you have mentioned about common humanity, the common suffering, charity that we can all do, and probably I'll just add on to this, and something that is so very important in society, in the building block of society, is the sanctity of the family. I think in Buddhism, and there you'll find it. Okay, let me come to the last question, which is more the more practical side of it. Can you give specific practical examples that churches or parachurch organizations that in Myanmar have been doing to build bridges, actual examples that you can think of, maybe from the church that you came from, certain humanitarian programs, how effective were they in terms of bridging this? Dr. Mang, would you like to start?
Yes, actually, before I left the country back in June 2022, the school where I work, Myanmar Institute of Theology, we formed the committee called the Crisis Response Committee, because after the pandemic and after the political crisis, thousands and tens of thousands and now hundreds of thousands, and right now over 1 million people were displaced from their homes, and the situation was and is dire for people, especially the smallest one, and the elderly men and women, and of course the least privileged, or I would say just the poorest, are neighbors. So what do we do? We raise funds from ourselves and churches and organizations and even individuals inside and outside the country, and just we secure some rice, and then we collect clothes, and then we deliver a rice bag, and then potato, and very simple cooking oil, and then any food items you can imagine, and any food items available would deliver to people who really need help like that, only to survive. In Rangoon, we have many people, tens of thousands of people who work in the industrial zones. But after the crisis in the pandemic, most of the companies, of course, they were no longer there. So people became, unemployed overnight, and you no longer have income to put, food at the table, bread at the table. So for those people, we try our best to support as much as we could. And of course, we also send some clothes and some food items. And in some places where we cannot reach, we send some funds only for humanitarian purpose, nothing more, nothing less. This is our way of showing our love to and or be the keepers of our brothers and sisters. So I think that is and has always been part of our tradition. And that's what my seminary, and I think many churches and seminaries had done before, and possibly now they are still doing. And I think that is a very important way of serving our people and helping our people. And in that way, of course, we also do the mission. Thank you. Yeah.
Dr. Situ, just a final point. Can you just add on your experiences?
Just one personal experience. It's been a long time, 2008, May 2008. Probably some of you remember that there was a cyclone here in Burma, Cyclone Nagis. It was a very, very powerful cyclone. And a lot of people died. And right after the cyclone, I did not die. I was in the hard-hit area. I came back to the city where I was living, and I started my volunteer work at a Baptist organization here. And a part of my job there was to distribute the reliefs, and then also to look for donors. And then through some of my contacts, I started to contact some Buddhist people. And then I told them that we are doing this. We need your help. Would you help us? Of course, since it is a Christian Baptist organization, the majority of our donors were Christians, but a lot of Buddhists also came. They came and donate, money. They came and donate food, and a lot of Buddhists came and donate a lot of things. It was very helpful. Mm-hmm. So, when it comes to our common problem, or when we think only about humanity, human suffering, we can work together. We don't need to talk about religion. I believe that those Buddhist donors back then, they came to a Christian organization with their Buddhist faith. They believe that as Buddhists, we need to do this. That was why they came and donated money and other things, So it was very, for me, it was a very profound experience, and it was very enlightening experience. So, like Dr. Mang said it very clearly, since we are human first, let's first talk about humanity and what human needs. But as we are Christians, in the back of our mind, we always know that we are always conscious that we human beings are the creation of God. Everyone is the creation of God. That will never go away. That will be the driving force behind us to work together with other people. So that is my experience, and then that is my theology, if you will. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for both of you for your principles that you've laid out and some very practical aspects of it. And I think the situation is, there's a place for humanitarian aid, and there will come a time also when when asked, we will explain what the Christian faith is about. And with this, I want to bring this session to a close, and I'll hand it back to Pastor Ben. Over to you.
Thank you, Samuel, and thank you, Dr. Mang and Dr. Situ. Thank you for the insights that you shared with us. Very encouraged by your continued perseverance in the Lord, even in difficult times. Thank you so much. Samuel, we do have one or two questions online on the chat. I wonder whether we want to briefly take these questions before we break out into our breakout rooms, because these may be questions that in the breakout rooms they might be asking as well. So I realized that the two questions are asked by Claire and myself. So
Yeah, I was just wondering whether we could take Claire's question, which is pertinent. Could
That's
you, if religion means identity, then how could a Burman become a follower of Christ? Let me repeat it now. If religion means identity, then how would a Burman become a follower of Christ? Situ, would you like to start on that?
Yeah, my short answer, but not very easy to do, is that Christ has to become a Burman first. A Burman doesn't need to become a Burman doesn't need to leave his or her identity. Christ needs to become a local first. So that, but it's not easy to do. I know, but that is, I think, probably that is the only option that we have. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a big question of contextualizing the Christian faith. Dr. Mang?
Thank you, Samuel. As Dr. Sidhu said, even Adoniram just tried his best to convert Burmans to Christianity, but without much success. And again, the reason is that Buddhism has been and still is part of the Burman identity, according to many, of course, Burmans. But with God, anything is possible. Sometimes from human part, that might be almost impossible. But as a Christian, we do believe with God, everything is possible. And we should remind ourselves that there are thousands of Burman Christians today. They can become Christian, even though they are Burman. So in very polarized, political context, identity is always there. But the fact is that God can change the heart of people. And at that point, Buddhism or whatsoever identity, it does not really matter. God can change the heart and the mind of the people. I will say again, there are tens of thousands of Burman Christians today in Burma, in Mandalay and in Yangon, and many other parts of the country. So that is the fact sometimes we forget. Thank you so much, Sam.
I think the official figures are something like 5 or 6% are Christians, but the unofficial figures are something like 7, 8, 9% actually. Over to you, Pastor Ben.
thanks, Samuel. Indeed, may Christ be seen through all Burman Christians. Okay, I thought it'd be good for us to begin to break out into our rooms. Again, these are breakout rooms according to our countries of interest. Joan would have assigned you to what we think is your country of interest. But if you would like to change country, you can always leave the breakout room back into the main room later on, and then let Joan know which country you would like to be put in. Okay. But in the breakout rooms, we want to ask ourselves these two questions. And this on the screen now. Can I ask for all of your help to begin to go to the link or to scan the QR code so that you can also then go to the Google slide and to look at the question thereafter in your breakout rooms. So the two questions that we're asking is this. First, what obstacles and challenges do you face in building bridges with the migrant population in Singapore? Right, because we are quite a cosmopolitan city, and there are various migrant groups, including our brothers and sisters from Myanmar as well. And so, what challenges that might be? How do we build bridges? What challenges do you face? And then, after listening to Dr. Mang and Dr. Situ, how can the Singapore Church encourage our mission partners overseas to build more effective bridges with those of other faiths in their respective countries? All right. So these will be two questions we're asking, and if you can discuss that in our breakout rooms, and then key in your answers into the Google slide. It will help us to learn together. Okay?
Pastor Ben, how much time do the groups have?
Right, we have till about 10:25, so we are aiming to come back at 10:25, so that's about 29 minutes or so. I see a chat from Joan that says you can decide which country groups you would like to join. Okay, so once we launch, then you can decide which country you like to join thereafter. Okay. Joan, any last minute instructions before we break out into our rooms?
And that's about it. The questions are also on the slides.
Yep.
You can either scan the QR code or click on the link that we just posted on.
Okay. Okay.
I think I will open all the rooms now.
Okay. So we'll break out into our rooms now. And as we go, we thank Dr. Mang and Dr. Situ and hope that they can stay on to the end. Thank you so much.